Hi, folks. You're with Taskless today. Taskless today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about a documentary I saw a few days ago, and it was about the secret police networks and systems of oppression that were used in the communist era in Eastern Europe. Now, this was the Soviet communist-controlled areas. They invaded these areas after, or at the end rather, of World War II, and then they made sure that puppet communist governments were put in place, and these governments, of course, were there without the consent of the people, and the communist system sort of taking private property and that sort of stuff. So very few people actually supported these governments, and given that the government was ideological rather than based on either consent or on science, they claimed it was based on science, but it was an ideologically imposed government without the consent of the people. So in any situation like that, ever, pretty much throughout human history, the government has to take severe measures to control the views, attitudes, and the information that the populace see. And their idea is, or their concept is, that if any idea other than the ideas they approve of somehow get loose into the community, that will cause all sorts of disruptions and conflicts and so on. So their job as government members of the government, and particularly the secret police, is to make sure that there is no other source of information, there are no other views or attitudes, and that behaviours that may, not will, but may lead to possibly, and they would describe this as enemies of the people, counter-revolutionaries. The revolution brings in wonderful things, and there are people who want to stop that, who are counter-revolutionaries and thus enemies of the people. So the secret police, their job was to make sure that thought conformity was absolute, and to do that they had to take, as they saw it, severe measures. So if somebody was found to have, I don't know, a Western music in their possession, for example, then Western music could lead to A, which could lead to B, which could lead to enemies of the people, which could lead to counter-revolution and so on. So they would see things in a very sort of Armageddon apocalyptic type lens, that it may begin with smoking a cigarette, but it's going to end up being on hard drugs and quickly. So that was their take on things. Now, given that the government is not accountable to the people, they're only accountable to the ideology, then governments that are ideologically sort of inclined, or where again they're only accountable to the ideology, they behave very differently from governments that are accountable to the people, and for obvious reasons. Now, so the secret police in effect become the terror squad to keep the ideology and to ensure the ideology is supreme, and that the government is never accountable to the people. Now, what was sort of quite shocking when I was watching the documentary was how similar the West has become today. That the police, which were normally the police force to pursue criminals, and so have been politicized to a point where they have become the secret police. There are more police now checking on social media posts than there are police out catching criminals and these sorts of things. Now, the social media posts are only targeting people that are a threat to the ideology. So when Islamic folks parade up and down waving flags, they're not really a threat to the ideology. If anything, they're contributing to the social disruptions that the ideology considers essential for its own survival. But if you're a straight white guy complaining about mass immigration, then you are a threat to the ideology, and it's those people that are targeted. And we see the same thing in the communist countries. If you murder and rob people and do this, don't really care. But if you have an idea that's contrary to or may threaten in some way possibly lead to a threat in some way to the ideology, then they'll clamp down quite hard on you. Now, in these societies, of course, you can have legal representation to a point, but all the lawyers are employed by the government, and if the lawyer who's representing the accused upsets the government in some way or upsets the ideology in the government in some way, then they'll never work again. And if you're a good little lawyer that makes sure that innocent people are thrown in prison, then you'll have a nice apartment and you'll have access to Western shops where you can buy Western consumer goods, things like that. And you can't have that. You won't get those things if you actually represent your client. We've got that the same in the West today. If you do a hatchet job on your client who's paying you, then you'll be richly rewarded with more government work. And there are psychologists, for example, and psychiatrists in Australia that do hatchet jobs on men all the time, whether they be in divorce courts or anything else. And some of these people have incomes of over $1 million a year. And yet they're just ordinary flunkies and stooges that just do the bidding of the ideological requirement of the moment. And they would be making just an ordinary income, thereabouts, and they'd be social workers on an ordinary income if they weren't doing these hatchet jobs as required. And we see this in these the lawyers are, again, government employees. Their job is to make sure that the accused actually goes to prison and can't defend themselves. The burden of proof is reversed, so that when someone is accused of being counter-revolutionary, enemy of the people, they have to prove that they're not. And it's a very difficult thing. If you haven't done the things you're being accused of, how can you prove you didn't do something that you didn't do? And nobody will come as a witness for you, so you're on your own. And if you want to call witnesses, say, well, I wasn't even there at the time, can't have been me, or these accusations must be false, then that witness will have a visit by the secret police telling them that their grandmother's ration card is going to be pulled if they don't back away from being a witness, and so on. So that there's mass intimidation. And we see this as well. The courts in the West now have been heavily politicized. And if you can bring witnesses to say you weren't there, or you didn't do it, or you couldn't have done it, and this sort of thing, then the courts will turn themselves inside out to make sure those witnesses don't give evidence, and use all sorts of deceit and treachery to achieve that aim, purely for the politicized ideological purpose of getting the guy and having him convicted of anything, no matter how spurious it is, while maintaining that the burden of proof rests with him, which in reality it doesn't. But ideologically, they flip the script there. And now when you're accused of a thought crime or a crime against the globalist ideology, then automatically the burden of proof is reversed. And again, you have a huge burden of proof to meet, where the state gives itself a very low burden of proof. And we see this too in these documentaries. Again, if someone had, all they needed was a book of poems from the West, non-approved ideological author, and that would be enough to say, well, if this person's doing that, it means they've got bourgeois thoughts. If they've got bourgeois thoughts, it means that they must be a capitalist. If they're a capitalist, it means they must be a counter-revolutionary, and therefore they're an enemy of the people. Arrest them for being an enemy of the people. And, well, hold on, all I had was a book of poetry. But we say that's a stepping stone to this. And we see that today in the wanting to shut down social media, where the various ideological commentators say, well, if you ever listen to Andrew Tate or can even mention his name, that means you're a far right Nazi, Hitler, swastika, yeah. And they can just say that if you've done this, if you ever ate breakfast cereal, then that means that you're Hitler, and they can make this elaborate automatic escalation of guilt and culpability. They can just assert it, and then it's your job to you have to disprove it, when you can't even find a lawyer to represent you, or a lawyer that won't sell you out. Look at how many lawyers, with the January 6th stuff in the US, or with the protests in Northern England recently, how many lawyers were telling their clients who were paying their bills, by the way, clients, oh, you just plead guilty. Go on, just roll over, plead guilty. And that's the people who are guilty of nothing. How many judges were then coming out with blatantly political statements? Diversity is our strength. That's a political statement, for fuck's sake, not a legal one. And then the judge giving, in some cases, 2 to 3 years in prison because they can assert, but you intended to do something bad. It was your intention, you damn swastika waving Nazi. And this is, again, exactly the same in the Eastern European communist secret police things, where they say, hey, you had a book of poetry. That meant you were trying to overthrow the government. That's what it meant. But it's a book of poetry. It doesn't matter. They can assert that. And once they've asserted it and taken a position, you can't disprove it. They just won't let you. Now, these people would get arbitrarily arrested and could be held without charge. But then that happened with the January 6th thing in the US. And we see some strange things going on in places like Germany. Even if you oppose the ideology, they'll come after you, and will use all sorts of illegal means, treachery, deceit, trickery, and underhanded methods to get the outcome they want. I mean, they're the bad guys, not you. I mean, let's be quite clear about that. If you've committed a crime, fine. You say what that crime is, and you go into an independent court of law and you prove your case against that person. That's so yesterday. That's all gone. And the interviews with the secret police agents and operatives, and they thought, no, we were protecting the ideology. The communist system was the best form of government that people ever known. There are those who were trying to stop it, subvert it, or didn't agree with it. Even just people who didn't agree with it, or weren't as wholeheartedly on board as we think they should have been. We regarded all them as enemies. It was our right to go after them and get them. Why should these people have legal rights? Why should they be allowed and afforded any benefit of the doubt? We have a right to go after them and get them and throw them in prison. Now it became, the torture and the beatings, but this is in a society where nobody owns anything. So you can't really take what they've got. What are you going to do? Take their book of poetry off them? I mean, which they did anyway. But that's hardly the end of the world. But in a society where people own things and have money and wealth, then you can take that. That's how you punish them. So instead of taking them to the back room and beating them up and putting them in prison for hard labor, and instead of doing that, in the West today, we just drain people of their money, drag them through the courts for as long as it takes until they haven't got a penny left, and then say, well, we'll leave you alone now. But they've already, the process is the punishment. They've broken you financially, and maybe to a point where you'll never recover from it. And that's how they get at you. It's by doing that. They don't have to take you out the back and beat you up and kick the shit out of you or something like that. That they can just bankrupt you, or accuse you of, make sure there's a rift between you and your loved ones and this sort of stuff, so that you're isolated and alone and broke and unemployable. That's how they can effectively kill you off today. Close your bank accounts, these sorts of things. And we saw that in Canada in the truckers protest. So they've got all sorts of ways of getting at you now without having to take you out back and kill you, or beat you senseless, torture you. The torture is financial and economic and isolating you. Now, also they use things in the Eastern Europe secret police to fuck with people's heads, so that even though you've been accused of no crime, as far as you know, you've committed no crime, they made it secret agents, people watching you would be super ostentatious. So you'd know you were, and this is a sort of mixture of Dostoevsky and Franz Kafka here, but you would realize you were being monitored and surveilled by Secret Service, secret police agents. So you would go to the authorities and say, look, I'm getting I'm getting surveilled here. And it seems like a 24/7 surveil. Am I guilty? Have I been accused of something? Is that, is there something you want to talk about? Oh, no, there's no, Mr. Billy Bob Smith. No, there's nothing. No, there's nothing here. Nothing we know of. Do you want to confess something? No, okay, all right. Oh, no, I don't. I'm sure you're not imagining it. You're going a little crazy or something. We can recommend a psychiatrist. So they'd fuck with people's head like that, and they'd also go into their apartments or their wherever they lived, and they'd move things around, like the TV would be pointing towards the window here, and then they turn it around so it's pointing to inside the room, and people would notice that, and they constantly do that to try and again screw with people's heads and turn them so they get paranoid. They're being watched all the time. They plant bugs and listen to them. They'd get to their friends, people that were close to them, and say, okay, we want you to inform on everything that Billy Bob says, and if you don't do that, we'll take away your grandmother's ration card, or we'll put your grandfather, out on the street from the retirement home, and all this sort of stuff. So these were the sort of terror tactics and mindfuck type tactics that we used. And again, as far as I'm concerned, this is what we're seeing today. People knocking on your door saying, police knocking on your door saying, we want to check your thinking. So the police increasingly are being used to surveil citizens who've committed no crime, who might commit it, and also to intimidate and threaten citizens who may just simply have the wrong point of view. And then there's the arbitrary arrest. And again, if you're seen to be threatening the ideology, and straight white people are really the first culprits, the go-to culprits on this one. If you're seen to be threatening the ideology, they'll come for you again and arrest you. As far as in my opinion, this is arbitrary arrest and arbitrary detention. And it's being achieved through politicized prosecutors and politicized courts. Now, in a communist country, everything was politicized because everything is there to support, defend, and protect and further the ideology. But increasingly, we're seeing this in the West now, today, right now. There's how many government departments are not politicized today in the West, and the difference in behavior between the secret police of the communist era and the politicized police we see in the West today, the difference is almost zero. Again, the only difference is instead of killing you and torturing you and beating you up, they just torture you economically and financially, bankrupt you. But otherwise, there's no difference. Not that I can see. You've been with Tassos today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.